Okay, so I'm going to follow on now and talk about the practical application, the practical implications of being multilingual. And I'm going to link to what's already been said, for example, Devyani talking about the tensions in identity across generations. One of the issues that we deal with in our service, and our service is, it's called Mothertongue, multi-ethnic councelling service, and we offer culturally and linguistically sensitive counselling to people from black and minority ethnic communities, which means that we can offer counselling and therapeutic support in 10 languages. All our counsellors and therapists are multilingual. And we also have a service, we've trained up, and we have a service of dedicated mental health interpreters as well, so that we can provide a service in more languages than just the 10 that our counsellors can provide. I've got a few slides, but I'm not going to show them because I am really going to try and stick to my 5 minutes worth. There's a final slide at the end which has got some information about another event that you might be interested in and some research that you might want to help us with as well. So if I forget to show the slide, can you remind me please, and I'll show it to you. So effectively what I want to talk about, I want to talk about two elements in terms of service provision and multilingualism. The first one is about working with interpreters. And there are 3 points that I wanted to make. The first is how important it is for interpreters that we work with to be trained interpreters, not just trained in how to interpret, but trained in how to work in different contexts. So the interpreter who comes to work in a service that's a mental health service will need to have a completely different type of training for one who's trained to work for housing or social services. And not only is it that interpreters have to be trained, but the service providers who are working with them have to be trained in order to work with interpreters. Otherwise, you get a service that's provided which is very, very one-sided, and you need to have service providers and interpreters working together as a team. And final point I want to make about working with interpreters for services is that the research shows, many people don't want to agree with the research, but there's been enough to show that frequently service users prefer to use family and friends rather than trained interpreters. And that's a challenge for service providers. How are they going to work with that preference and that choice sensitively, but at the same time providing a high quality service? So it's a real challenge. The other thing I wanted to say about multilingualism and its impact on services is the fact that it hasn't been mentioned yet, but I think if I were to ask people in the room who speak more than one language, do you feel different when you're speaking in different languages? Do you feel sometimes like a different person? My guess is that the majority of people would say that they do. So if people are accessing services using just one of their languages, service providers are not getting a full picture of the person who's in front of them. And if they're coming for support, and if they're vulnerable, a whole area of a person's life, their experiences, their beliefs, their values are not even being taken into account. And the final point that I want to make about multilingualism and its impact on services is that being somebody who can speak more than one language is a source of potential support and of coping strategies as well. And I want to give you one example, one little story to illustrate this. A consultant psychiatrist who was working at the Maudsley was working with a young man who was very severely unwell. Now, the psychiatrist was fluent in English and Spanish, she was bilingual, and it so happened that the patient was also bilingual, English and Spanish. English was his native language, and Spanish was the language he'd learnt as a teenager. And they would code switch in the therapeutic clinical sessions. And one day the patient said to the doctor, "Doctor, I've just realised something. When I speak to you in Spanish, I'm completely sane. And when I speak to you in English, I'm completely mad." And it's absolutely fascinating because the emotional experiences that the young man had had, which had led him to have a psychotic episode, had been experienced in English in his younger years. But he learnt Spanish in a very cognitive way. And when he was speaking Spanish, he was bypassing those kind of emotional memories that were stored in the mother tongue. And so it gave him a protective factor that, had he just been a monolingual, he wouldn't have had. So I think it's a really important thing for us as service providers to bear in mind when we encourage somebody to use one language or another, and why, and not to just get into a very easy formula of mother tongue good, other language not so good. Because sometimes it's the other language that can provide the initial type of communication which will be helpful. Okay, so I'll just skip along to my final slide. I think I've done it even under 5 minutes. And just show you, oh, hang on, this last one. Okay, so there are two things on here. The first thing is that we are currently undertaking some research with multilingual clients. I'm not going to say nothing's ever been done before. There's been quite a lot of work, and we've done some of the work on looking at the experiences of multilingual therapists. But there's very little done on the experiences of multilingual clients. And we're doing it via a short, anonymous questionnaire. And so far, we've been staggered by the results we've got. They may not seem great to you, but they seem huge to us. We've had just short of 200 returns. And we're short by four. So I've come here really to plead. Can you please, just copy this down, put it in your browser, and fill it in. If it applies to you, it's completely anonymous. If it applies to you, if you know anybody it might apply to, just spread the word as much as you can, because it would be fantastic if we actually got and hit the 200 mark. So that's that. And then the other thing is just to say something about an event that's happening on June the 21st, the Bloomsbury Roundtable, where we're going to be talking even more about the multilingual communication in health and social care, and what are the challenges for service providers and for service users. And I'd be delighted if you wanted to, there's my email address as well, if you want to find out any more about it. So thank you very much.